Hello everybody, and welcome to Christchurch Cathedral and the second installment of the Emily Carr String Quartet's presentation of the complete cycle of Beethoven string quartets. We acknowledge with respect that this concert is coming to you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. We wish also to thank our sponsors, the Gail O'Riordan Climate and the Arts Series Fund, the Victoria Foundation, the BC Arts Council, and the Capital Regional District. And also, the Emily Carr String Quartet wants to thank our hosts and co-presenters, Christchurch Cathedral. This concert will begin with the second of the 6 string quartets Beethoven published in 1801 as his Opus 18. Although it is the second in order, it's generally assumed, through scholarly research of course, that this was in fact the third quartet that Beethoven wrote. And it did take him a little while to find the necessary confidence to publish a collection of string quartets, and also in the traditional number that Mozart and Haydn had established before him of 6. It's often suggested that Beethoven felt a little bit intimidated by the very, very strong figures of Haydn and Mozart, and there's probably something to that. After all, when Beethoven arrived in Vienna in 1792, he shortly thereafter began studying with Haydn. Also, the model of Mozart was very strongly apparent to him as well. Now, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background about some of the people who made the music possible, since we've just thanked our own sponsors, some of the patrons that Beethoven had around him virtually for his whole career in Vienna. The person to whom Opus 18 is dedicated is Prince Franz Joseph von Lobkowitz, who was almost the same age as Beethoven, a couple of years younger, but he died quite a few years before Beethoven did. He was himself an amateur musician, and he sang as well as played string instruments. Now, this next quote is just simply too good not to give it to you exactly. The sister-in-law of another very aristocratic patron wrote, "This Prince, Lobkowitz, was as kind-hearted as a child and had the most foolish enthusiasm for music. He played music from dusk to dawn and spent a fortune on musicians. Would there were more like him around. Innumerable musicians always gathered in his house, and he treated them all regally." That in itself is, I think, an excellent quote, but the name of this countess is irresistible, Countess Lulu Thurnheim. In any case, the Count was a very appreciative and sophisticated musical patron, and he built himself a palace, calling it, of course, after himself in Vienna, that had a room large enough to host the first ever performance of the Eroica Symphony in 1804. That was before its first public performance, but to get even a handful of people and a whole orchestra to play the Eroica Symphony in your living room is something that very few of the musicians even he supported could ever have boasted. So it was he who also bore not only this dedication, but that of the Eroica, the Fifth Symphony, Beethoven's only song cycle, and Die Ferne Geliebte. And also, Lobkowitz was responsible for commissioning the very last quartets that Haydn wrote. In 1799, the year that Beethoven was engaged in composing the piece you're about to hear, Lobkowitz asked Haydn to write the customary 6 quartets for him, but the composer was just too weak and feeble to complete the commission, so only 2 were prepared, and these are published today as Haydn's Opus 77. But the following year, or around the same time, I should say, Lobkowitz was also one of the people responsible for arranging and funding the premiere of Haydn's The Creation. When we look at this juncture in Viennese classical music history, we see Beethoven and Haydn very much occupying the sort of crossroads. And although Beethoven was not always complimentary about Haydn's teaching, at least not when it was happening, Beethoven, after all, was young and had many of the qualities we associate with youth, ultimately, there's no way Beethoven could not have been profoundly affected by the atmosphere Haydn created in Vienna, especially around this genre. People speak of Haydn as the father of the symphony. I think it had several fathers, but the string quartet really has him. It didn't exist as a genre until Haydn came along. So this particular piece is often referred to as a piece, a compliments quartet. I wrote out the German, I'm going to attempt to say it. Komplimentierung Quartet. I didn't succeed. But what that means is it's a quartet full of bows and curtsies and good manners, elegant conversation. In this regard, it's considered among the more Haydn-esque quartets, but also as one containing challenges to the great master. A wonderful and internationally regarded Beethoven scholar named William Kinderman used to teach at the University of Victoria in the music school. And he said that this quartet shows a thorough assimilation of Haydn's comedy of manners, merged with an occasional dramatic thrust that is unmistakably Beethoven's own. So the bows and curtsies have a few slightly unexpected surprises. And one of the things that we see in Haydn, and I'm going to quote another musicologist, Donald Francis Tovey, is a almost unquenchable curiosity in seeing how remote keys can blend together. Surprises. His music is full of surprises, but they always seem to make perfect sense after they've been brought on us. And an almost maniacal obsession with looking to see everything that a small motive of music could reveal. And Beethoven will be much more fertile in his melodies than Haydn was, but he has the same ability and the same concentration on finding out what the musical material can reveal about itself. And we hear some of this in this incredibly genial, but also unbelievably vital quartet, Opus 18, number 2. The first movement has what's described as a warm elegance to it. It is in the key of G major, which is the key of the piece, of course, but we'll find an extended section in E major. This is Beethoven's ability to find a relationship between keys that appear to the ear and the eye somewhat remote. Also, we'll have an opening material that's used and built upon subsequently in the movement. This is very much also something that perhaps Beethoven inherited from Haydn, either reading his scores or having lessons with him. The second movement is extraordinary. Already by Opus 18, Beethoven will have published many groundbreaking and innovative works in the genres popular of the day, the piano sonata, the piano trio, etc. But here we have a slow movement that suddenly has a scherzo in the middle of it. The slow movement, marked Adagio cantabile, is really like a cantilena with a beautiful, almost operatic aria-like melody in the violin. And it does feel like we're transported from a room in a sophisticated and elegant house to the opera house. But then suddenly, there's this peculiar little scherzo that moves us from C to F major and lasts all of, well, 60 seconds or 50 seconds, depending on which performance you hear. So even in these early quartets, there's plenty of innovation. And when the Adagio comes back, we now have a duet between violin and cello. It was Haydn who asked a question. He did answer it himself by writing scherzos. He said, who can show us a new way of writing minuets? And if Haydn brought the scherzo into the string quartet, if Haydn brought the scherzo into the string quartet and other genres, Beethoven absolutely took up that torch and continued. So we have a scherzo in trio, very entertaining, and somebody wrote about it. There's a relationship between triple and duple rhythms that's wonderful to listen to, but the thing seems to be lively but polite, again, back in the world of compliments. One of my favorite quotes that I read about the last movement, which is marked Allegro molto quasi presto. That would basically mean fast, extremely fast. First of all, it's wonderful detours to the most amazing distant keys, almost as if it's playing a game with us called Guess My Key. And again, we'll hear music that we hear at the very beginning of it that's continually reused and reworked, something that Beethoven, again, may have inherited from Haydn, but makes thoroughly his own. After all, the Beethoven of the 1790s in Vienna was the Beethoven who challenged and who was determined to emerge not as the new kid on the block, but the new leader on the block. So here, with Opus 18, number 2, string quartet in G major, the Emily Carr String Quartet. Thank you. Thank you, and bravi for that wonderful performance. We're moving now to the middle period of Beethoven's career, and the distance that separates the publication of Opus 18 in 1801 and Opus 59, the next set of string quartets in 1808, is really not that long. And the distance that separates their composition is not even that much. And yet there's a world of difference, not only in Beethoven's music, but in his position within the cultural firmament of Viennese classical music. The first thing to say is, of course, everybody, even if they don't listen to music, knows that Beethoven went deaf. And so his chronic hearing loss was already fairly profound by 1808. But his reputation in Vienna was now very firmly established. And in fact, so was it elsewhere in Europe. And we've come to another great musical patron from the aristocracy, the Russian ambassador, Count Razumovsky. Now, Razumovsky was also very supportive patron of Beethoven throughout his life. And together with Lobkowitz, they received the dedications for the 5th and 6th symphonies. And one of the things that Razumovsky did, I told you already that Lobkowitz built a palace. Razumovsky actually discussed the possibility with a violinist named Ignaz Schuppanzig to create a quartet that would be his own sort of musical kapelle or chapel. And this quartet would play for him and play for his guests and also be at the disposal of Beethoven. Beethoven had his own personal quartet at the Razumowski estate that he could rehearse his works with, and they could help him almost improve the works. As we know from his countless sketchbooks that have survived, Beethoven was a laborious worker, profoundly self-critical, continually revising things, and the opportunity he had to play these quartets or to hear them played by a first-rate professional quartet employed by his patron was incalculable. So they could rehearse before Razumowski and his guests. And so Razumowski commissioned 3 quartets, which would be for his own personal use. Already you'll see that the number of quartets in this publication has been halved. In fact, after Opus 59's publication in 1808, the remainder of Beethoven's quartets are singletons, single works. And this is not a coincidence. The quartet is becoming more and more and more a vehicle for Beethoven's deepest and most profound musical thoughts. And so the idea that a quartet would be one of a huge number of 6 is less and less attractive to him. They're also becoming longer, and they're also becoming more and more full of profound musical thoughts. As somebody put it, the emotional spectrum is becoming just simply wide, too much to repeat 6 times in a publication. The works were almost certainly composed in 1806, but the deal then was that an aristocrat who commissioned the work and paid for it had exclusive use of it for at least a year. And so Beethoven published it after Razumowski's term of exclusive ownership had ended. So the one we're going to listen to of the 3 is the middle one, Opus 59, number 2, the one in a minor key. And it is customary to have at least one movement in a contrasting key, and despite the fact that Beethoven fiddles around with keys quite a lot like he did in Opus 18, number 2, really each of the 4 movements focuses on a single tonic, E. So this is in E minor, sometimes E major, and it tries to talk us into thinking one movement's in C major, but no, it ends in E minor. One of the things that I found fascinating about reading about this quartet came from a pianist, a great Beethoven pianist, and a young one named Jonathan Biss, who pointed out the similarity in feeling, not in anything else, between this quartet and one that Beethoven, a piano sonata that Beethoven wrote around the same time, nicknamed the Appassionata, which was published as Opus 57. And what is pointed out is that Beethoven so frequently begins a work in a tragic vein, but not that often finishes it in a tragic vein. If you think of the C minor symphony, the famous number 5, that has an entirely joyous and victorious final movement in C major, but no such thing happens here. So the first movement will begin, almost like the Eroica Symphony itself does, with 2 chords that lead to a mysterious silence, and then move into a second subject in G major. And as one person put it, I like these 2 little phrases that I found. It's full of harmonic uncertainty, and isn't that a quality we associate with Beethoven? And also his ability to pivot to distant keys on a dime. Now, the second movement is famous for any number of reasons, and in this movement, Beethoven begins with the instruction, treat this piece with a great deal of feeling. So it opens with a kind of hymn-like evocation that was said to have been inspired in Beethoven's musical brain by gazing at a starry sky. Now that anecdote comes to us from Beethoven's student Carl Czerny. And as anybody who has looked at the 19th century biographies of Beethoven will know, that we have to take this with a cake of salt rather than a grain of salt, but Czerny did know Beethoven. Now, there's a great dynamic range, and there's also Beethoven's accustomed trick of using a subito forte, especially on an offbeat, which is meant to take us by surprise and which does. Now I'm going to read a quote from the same person, then depart from it. This guy wrote this in the liner notes to a program in which the Beethoven Opus 59 number 2 was on the program. Movement 3 is so funky. If I didn't know better, I would say that Beethoven was a student of African drumming. The rhythmic cells of the opening theme fit together like a percussion riff, full of cross rhythms, creating the kind of prism-like effect one finds in complex drumming or minimalist compositions. Very cool. So I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it, although I don't know that Beethoven was ever a student of African drumming. This movement is sort of like, it seems like it's going to be a scherzo in trio, but instead of bringing the scherzo back only once after the B section, its overall graphic structure is A, B, A, B, A, Razumovsky had requested that Beethoven use Russian music in the Razumovskys, and he does in this one and the first one. There's a song, a Russian song that had been published in 1790 called Glory to the Sun, and it will appear in the trio section of this work, of this movement, which goes between E minor and E major. That song was subsequently used by Russian composers, genuine Russian composers, Mussorgsky, Arensky, and Rachmaninoff. Finally, the last movement, which seems like it's going to begin in C major, but then moves to B major, and then back to E minor. And then, boom, we're back in C again. However much, though, the movement has a tremendous amount of vitality, it most definitely has also a feeling of tragic inevitability or inexorableness. So it is also very much a product of Beethoven's middle period, very much a product of a composer who had found himself, who knew he was the established leader of music in Vienna and continued to explore like the relentless maverick he remained. Please enjoy Opus 59, number 2, one of the Razumovsky quartets with the Emily Carr String Quartet.
Thank you for watching us.